We know very well that Israel could not conduct this genocide by itself. It has only been able to do so due to a massive and continuous airlift of weapons, especially bombs, from the United States. And of course, all the warplanes Israel uses to bomb Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen are provided by the United States as well. While the US is Israel's main arms supplier, Germany and other states play a major role as well. We're pleased to welcome back Shir Hever to the live stream. Shir is the military embargo coordinator for the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions National Committee, the BNC. Shir, who lives in Germany, is the author of The Privatization of Israeli Security and the Political Economy of Israel's Occupation. Shir, welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thanks for having me on such a dramatic day.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. Well, we're going to get into the arms embargo and kind of, your analysis of Israel's political economy in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the latest developments with the ceasefire deal and what's happening with Israel. As we've been reporting at the Electronic Intifada, there are two key factors that led to this happening now. The first is the continued strength of the resistance on the ground in Gaza, inflicting daily losses on the Israeli army, which after 15 months has not managed to impose its control on any part of Gaza, despite perpetrating genocide. And the second is Donald Trump's apparent willingness, surprising to many, to apply direct pressure on Israel that the Biden administration has refused to do. But what are the factors within Israeli society that may have contributed to Netanyahu finally accepting a deal that was on the table that he has refused for more than a year?
Yeah, I think we can talk about two main factors within Israeli society. The first one is the religious one, because Netanyahu has always tried to frame the colonialism of the colonial occupation, apartheid, and also the genocide as a religious war, as if this is between Judaism and Islam in some way, which is, of course, a false narrative completely, but it helps his popularity within Israel. And in order to do so, he has tried to create a coalition within Israel of very different factions. The way that apartheid works, it creates internal divisions because it creates a complex hierarchy. And different groups within Israel, they expect to have privileges, not only over Palestinians, but also over certain Jewish groups within Israeli society. So there is now a deep crisis within Israeli society. And the only reason that the Netanyahu is able to stay in power is through a continued crisis. He needs the genocide to continue. He also needs the suffering to continue, not just on the Palestinian side, but on some level on the Israeli side as well. You've spoken about the resistance. You've spoken, the fallen Israeli soldiers, the injuries, and so on, because that makes it possible for him to say, as long as this is happening, I need to stay in power. But the soldiers on the ground, they are not really part of the ultra-Orthodox, or not at all part of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish tradition, which by and large opposes militarism. It's mainly an anti-Zionist movement. And even though there are a lot of ultra-Orthodox people in Israel who are racist, who support the military, support Zionism indirectly and support the genocide, but they will take no part in it. And they say, well, we are praying for the soldiers to win and to destroy the Palestinians, but the soldiers don't accept that. The soldiers say, no, we want them to fight. So this creates a very deep political problem within Israel, which is insurmountable, actually. There is just no way in this apartheid system, which is built on so much hate between the different groups, that any kind of majority government can sustainably stay in power. This is why Israel had so many elections rapidly, one after the other, over such a long time, because every time a new government has some kind of fragile agreement, and it always falls when it reaches those contradictions. So this is a religious problem. And I think it's very interesting because the religious problems are very, they hinge on a very populist perception of what is religion. And you see that Netanyahu, for example, when he wants to go to Poland and attend the Auschwitz liberation ceremony, maybe something we should say something about it, because I mean, as a Jew, I find this horrible and proof that Poland really doesn't care about the commemoration of the Holocaust if they're inviting a genocidaire to commemorate another genocide. But this is, but Netanyahu, it's so important for him to go to this ceremony, despite the arrest warrant against him by the ICC, because he needs to show that he represents the Jewish people. That is such an important point. Now, when Donald Trump won the election and decided he's going to appoint a Middle East envoy even before being inaugurated, he appointed Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff called Netanyahu and said, "I'm coming to Israel and I'm going to talk to you about the negotiations. So there's going to be a ceasefire deal before Trump is inaugurated." And Netanyahu said, "Oh, but that's not possible because it's Shabbat." And, again, bringing in the religious part into it. But this is maybe the difference between the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration, because the populism can also recognize populism for what it is. And of course, Steve Witkoff understands that this is not about Netanyahu respecting Shabbat in any religious way. It's just another excuse. And he said, "I'm not interested in your Shabbat," something that I doubt somebody in the Biden administration would dare say. So that's one thing that we see, the religious aspect. The second aspect really has to do with the military embargo. And I hope that's going to be the core of our conversation, really, because you mentioned that the same deal was offered already by the Biden administration almost a year ago. And Hamas did accept it, and Netanyahu didn't. And at that moment, there were talks that the Biden administration might delay certain weapons, might prevent certain weapons from reaching Israel. And then there was this famous speech by Netanyahu where he said, "We're going to fight with our tooth and nail. We don't need those weapons." Again, clear populism, clear lies. Everybody knows that he's lying. But he had the audacity to say it because there was within the Israeli public security that there are enough weapons coming, one way or another. And the Israelis still believed, well, if the US will delay some weapons, we'll get them elsewhere. We'll get them from Germany. We'll get them from Serbia. That's also something very important to mention, because Serbia has an agreement with Israel, two countries that have decided not to recognize each other's genocides and are trading weapons in violation of international law. So Netanyahu was able to make that bold statement. But I think now the public opinion in Israel has shifted. The military embargo is something that Israelis are completely aware of. They know that there is a military embargo. They know that the only country that is providing Israel with a steady supply of weapons is the United States. Yes, also Germany is supplying weapons, but is supplying certain kinds of weapons and not others, so it's not enough. And Trump really has the ability to completely disarm Israel within. I mean, Biden had it as well, but Biden had no intention of doing so. And now Netanyahu cannot say we'll fight with our tooth and nails again, because now the Israeli public understands that it's just not going to work. And so there is an understanding within Israel that the independence of the Israeli military, its ability to continue to fight, is a whole different story now. And this is a direct result of the military embargo.
We're definitely going to talk more about the military embargo, but before we get to that, I do want to ask you a little bit more, just to follow up on the discussion we had with you when you were last with us in June, and you told us about the impact that the war and genocide in Gaza have been having on Israeli society, economically and socially. That was 7 months ago, and in the meantime, there was also the war with Lebanon, the Iranian missile strike on October 1st, and of course the ongoing strikes from Ansarullah in Yemen. I want to show you a recent headline and get your reaction to it. And this is just from 2 weeks ago, from December 31st, where we have the Times of Israel that has this article, which states, quote, an unusually large number of Israelis left the country over the course of 2024, the Central Bureau of Statistics said, fueling a sharp slowdown in population growth amid a dragged-out war and domestic political turmoil. The article also says that Israel is including more than 200,000 foreign workers in its population figures for the first time. Is that an effort to hide Israel's population decline? What can we read from these figures? Are they like Israel's casualty figures, where they're massaged, and or are they telling a true story? What's going on? And
Yeah,
more
there's
broadly as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course, there's a lot of propaganda, a lot of massaging of the facts by the various Israeli institutions that are collecting the data. But in addition to this, there's also just a lack of capacity, which I think is very interesting, that the Israelis just don't know. I mean, a lot of people that I know, that I'm in touch with, that have decided to leave Israel are not, canceling all of their contracts, saying goodbye to all their friends, taking a one-way ticket and just leaving Israel behind. They don't know what the future will bring, especially people with families. So they sign a long-term lease on some apartment in Greece or in Portugal or in Cyprus, and they say, well, we'll send our kids to school in that country for 1 year, then we'll see what happens. Let's still pay some of our social taxes in Israel so we don't lose our benefits. So as long as you pay those taxes, you're not listed as having left the country. You're counted as only on vacation. So those numbers are not even showing. So this is happening. I don't know if we can talk about a decline in the population, because overall the number of people, the number of well, we have in an apartheid situation. It's a very complex situation. It's not just the citizens, it's also the residents, it's also people who are not recognized by the authorities and undocumented and so on. There are many different levels. In East Jerusalem, residents are officially supposed to be part of a territory that Israel has annexed, but nevertheless they don't have citizenship. But I don't think that we are seeing a decline in the overall population. The important thing is, who are the people who are living? What are their characteristics? And the people who are leaving are first and foremost the people who have the opportunity to leave. Not necessarily that they have the political inclination, but rather just that they have the education, the money, the connections, a job offer overseas. Maybe they work in an international company and they can ask for a relocation or transfer within the company. Those people belong to the elite. Those people are the upper middle class, and they are the engine of Israel's economy. They are the ones who fuel the high-tech sector. Also, they are the ones who fuel the Israeli military strength, which relies not on foot soldiers with guns, but relies on intelligence and on high-tech weapons and complicated guidance system and surveillance, and all that stuff is developed by companies staffed by those upper middle class people who are leaving in large numbers. There was recently the PISA education results, which is an international testing system to test various competencies among school children. And Israel dropped dramatically in both mathematics and sciences because also the best teachers are leaving. And the families and as the education system is anyway in a free fall, really, the tech companies are saying, well, if this is the next generation of students in schools who are and in universities that will graduate and will want to work for us, we're going to need to find our workforce elsewhere. So that's part of the wave of divestment that we see. So I don't think it's just the question of what is the population trend, but it is a capitalist economy. A capitalist economy is always about what is the prospects for the future. Nobody makes an investment unless they think the investment will bring a profit in the future. And if you think the future is bleak, and most Israelis think the future is very bleak for the Israeli economy, then why make an investment? So if the Israeli own population, when they go to the bank and say, I want to make sure that my pension fund or my insurance funds or whatever, my personal investments are not invested in the Israeli economy. I have no faith in the Israeli economy. Please invest abroad. And so many people have done that the trust funds, which are operated within Israel for those kinds of investments, have shifted more than 50% of their investments abroad. And ironically, this created the image as if the Israeli economy is actually not affected so much by the war, because then they got dividends in foreign currency. They got a lot of dollars and euros from those investments they made abroad. They brought them to Israel and converted them to the Israeli currency, thereby sustaining in a very artificial and unsustainable way the Israeli currency. But as the cost of living in Israel skyrockets, these profits evaporate very quickly. So people who have no choice and they have to stay because they don't have another passport, they don't speak English or other languages, they don't have good education, or a lot of people who have sick parents that they need to take care of and so on. So they have to stay. They see their daily cost of living going up and up, out of control. The government is going to increase taxes, raise the prices even more through consumer taxes. A much more impressive headline that I've seen in the Israeli news this week was that the whole war was actually funded with debt. So the resources that Israel used in order to finance the war is all based on debt. And it's all about the hype that the Israeli economy has, which allows them to continue to sell bonds to investors who are stupid enough, sorry for saying so, to believe that if you buy a 10-year bond from Israel, you're ever going to see your money back. This is just a way to throw your money into the garbage, because there's no way Israel will ever repay this debt. And the Minister of Finance, who is also a fanatic settler, one of and a very religious person, he believes that victory will still come because Trump was sent by God to save Israel. And Smotrich believes that people can continue to believe to buy into those lies that he's telling, that the deficit is not so bad, that the debt is still manageable. Members of his own ministry are leaving in frustration because they don't want to be caught when this whole house of cards falls down. They don't want to be part of it. The system is very much rotten from within. But once again, if you allow me, I want to connect it to the military embargo.
Please,
because
yes.
Because I think that one amazing thing that we see with the military embargo now is it's so hard to measure if the military embargo is really working or not, and how fast is it growing. But one very sure way of measuring it is the response within Israel. And according to Israeli law, the government has to propose a budget, and the Knesset, the parliament, has to authorize it by October for the next year. And if they don't do it by the end of October, the government falls and they go to elections. So they haven't actually passed the budget in the Knesset yet from last October. They just changed the law and gave themselves more time. We are now already in 2025. The budget is not really authorized yet. But in the draft of the budget, which is supposed to be discussed, they have said they're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, which they don't have, in order to build a military industry in Israel to replace all of the weapons, ammunition, and materials that they cannot get because of the military embargo. And this is amazing. First of all, just a side note here, you cannot build materials. Raw materials, no matter how many factories you make, if you don't have the raw materials, you're not going to get the materials. You have to import them. But of course, this is a message to the public. We're going to do everything locally. They're going to build a TNT plant, which will be an environmental disaster. And I really think that this is. I hope they never have time to do it, because this is Palestine and the Palestinian land, and Israel has no right to pollute the land that belongs to Palestinians. But the whole military industry that they're trying to develop, where they're saying, okay, if we cannot buy get the engines that we need for our vehicles and the components for the drones or for the F-35 planes, we don't have enough rifles, we don't have enough artillery, we're going to build everything domestically, no matter what it costs. But this shows how short a historical memory people have in Israel, because this whole war, this whole genocide, has been a rerun, from the Israeli point of view, a rerun of the War of 73. Right? The War of 73 started as a surprise attack against Israel on October 6th, and then 50 years later and 1 day later, it was October 7. And once again, Israel was caught by surprise and underestimated their enemies and overestimated their own intelligence capabilities. And there was a big crisis. But the War of 73, there's something that in my research I've investigated it a lot, because the War of 73 came just 6 years after the occupation of 67. Before 67, the biggest supplier of weapons to Israel was France. This was before the US major military financing to Israel. France was the biggest supplier. And Israel conquered all of Palestine and also parts of Egypt and Syria using French weapons, mostly. That's not very well-known fact. After the war, France said, if Israel is not going to withdraw from the territory that it conquered and occupies, then we will impose a military embargo. And Israel had no intention of withdrawing, of course, still doesn't. And France did impose a military embargo. And then the response in Israel was, well, who needs them anyway? We'll produce everything locally. The same thing that we're seeing now. And they did spend a lot of money, and they built this massive industry to build everything in Israel, the tanks, the airplanes, the ships, the artillery. And then the War of 73 happened and started, and the Syrian and Egyptian armies in that war were armed with Soviet weapons, which were far superior to the Israeli domestically made weapons. The Israelis, the Uzi submachine gun that Israel is so proud of, had a range of 100 meters. The Soviet Kalashnikov had 400 meters range. So infantry battles were completely one-sided. And the Israelis were about to be wiped out. I mean, the Israeli forces were about to be wiped out until the US came and gave them American weapons, and that changed the course of the war. Now it seems that Israel has forgotten this completely, because they're doing the same mistake they did in 1967. Faced with the military embargo, their response, we don't need the world, we'll do everything on our own, we'll build everything. And now, and not only this, they're planning to build all these weapons when their best engineers, their best technological experts, their best professors have left the country. So this is a connection, I think, that we see between the military embargo and the expanding military embargo that we see, and the collapse of the Israeli economy.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Your work with the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee, or the BNC, on the military embargo is, there's so much that's coming out about this, a lot, based on your work. Last week, the BNC published this article titled "The Military Embargo is Here." It says that, quote, global South governments are taking important steps in implementing the military embargo. Tell us more about some of those actions and what is significant about this current military embargo that is, that is taking place.
So the military embargo is legally obligated It's an obligation under international law anyway. So the fact that we don't see a comprehensive military embargo against Israel implemented from day one of the genocide is unfortunately a sign of a lot of hypocrisy, mainly in the West, not only, but mainly in the West. Over the last 15 months of genocide, the indicators of military embargo have been gathering, because in the end, governments are not going to make that decision on their own. But once the grassroots pressure emerges and grows, and there is media attention to this, and people are protesting effectively, then eventually the governments do implement the military embargo. So it took time. It took those, there's not a specific moment in which you can say, here, the military embargo has become so overwhelming. But I do think that when the Israeli society is seeing it, feeling it, they don't trust Netanyahu anymore to be able to fight this war without U.S. support, and they don't trust the government budget to import weapons from countries that are reluctant to export them or refuse to export them, and so they decide to try to make everything domestically. This is maybe an indication that we are reaching a critical mass. But this critical mass is made out of I've counted about 100 discrete events around the world, and mentioned, and the article that the BNC published mentions the most impressive ones, not all 100, but many of them, and under different categories. So you mentioned the Global South, which I think is very much worth mentioning, because the Global South, one thing we can say is that people who live in the Global South know something about colonialism and decolonialism. Unfortunately, many of the governments in the Global South are not necessarily progressive and pro-Palestinian governments at all. So their response to October 7 was not to say, okay, we have a legal obligation to implement a military embargo against Israel, but rather this would be a bad idea to buy the tools of surveillance and oppression that Israel has been testing on Palestinians for decades, and in order to use them against their own population, when we see that these tools are not working, and when we see that these companies, that the Israeli economy and the Israeli society is marching towards oblivion. So a lot of Israel's exports just plummeted. Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms company, reported that their entire sales to the Global South have halved after October 7, halved. But they are selling to the Global North, because those countries prefer not to remember what colonialism is about and decolonialism is about. So those countries with a shorter memory for political reasons were slower to respond. But eventually, we do see that as well. We see that through unions who made statements. And this is very important, because the law is on their side. The unions, when they say, we cannot transit these weapons to Israel because we will be committing a serious crime. And as employees of a company, we shouldn't be ordered to commit a crime. And we could be actually prosecuted if we do. So they passed motions to in many different countries, and it is accelerating. Just this week we've seen the Swedish port workers vote to impose a two-way military embargo, not to export, not to import. But even though it's very important, of course, to see that coming from countries like Sweden, it's even more important to see this coming from the transiting countries, because the biggest supplier of the weapons is the United States. The United States is not delivering its weapons to Israel through Sweden, but it is delivering them through Ireland and Belgium and Netherlands and Portugal and Spain and Italy, France, Germany, Slovenia, even Greece and Cyprus. In Greece, for example, the unions have had information that a container of ammunition is on a ship headed to Israel. So they took the container to the fish market, and they guarded it there so that nobody can take it from them. And the ship had to leave without it, and they effectively stopped a whole shipment, these giant containers with tons of ammunition. Just imagine how many lives were saved by stopping one container of bullets. So this is very inspiring work, and because it's so inspiring, because it's important for people to understand that this is a trend, that it's growing in momentum, that the military embargo is not the exception, it is the norm. It's actually the United States which is the exception, and the United States is finding it more and more difficult to send their weapons through the tightening military embargo of countries that refuse to transit these weapons. Then it's a message that I hope will help inspire groups all over the world to take on military embargo campaigns from the grassroots, through academia, unions, civil society, and eventually through governments.
And it can be done. It's being done. Yeah.
It is being done. And of
Yeah.
course, a few weeks ago or a month or two ago, we had some of the activists, two of the activists from the Palestinian youth movement, who've done incredible research into this, and whose research helped prompt Spain to stop transshipments of weapons from the United States to Israel, which is really important. Shir, you've talked about the global south, but of course, as we know, and as you've said, most of the weapons come from the United States. And yes, a lot of us don't think about the importance of the transiting countries taking action as a serious contribution to an arms embargo. In the paper published by the BNC, it talks about cracks in the genocide enabling countries, in other words, the Western countries, which are Israel's main allies. And until they really decide to impose arms embargoes on a large scale, Israel will still be able to get its weapons. Do you agree with that? And what are the cracks, and how big are they, I suppose?
Well, the supply chain is a fragile thing, because the United States is willing to give those weapons for free, but no other country is. So once Israel runs out of money, then also the supply chain collapses. Spain in many ways is leading the conversation within Europe, even though the Spanish government has so far refrained from adopting a comprehensive statement that they will impose a three-way military embargo. But at least on the issue of selling and on the issue of transiting, the Spanish government recognizes its obligation. And I've met with members of the Spanish parliament and the Spanish minister to talk with them about this a year ago. It took some time for them to take action. And they have actually stopped ships carrying weapons to Israel already in the summer. But more recently, you mentioned the Maersk and the campaign, because it took another effort to explain to the Spanish government that petrol, which includes also petrol products like jet fuel, is a dual-use item. So they refused to acknowledge that. But of course, you need jet fuel for the planes that bomb Gaza. And now I think the Spanish government is starting to understand this, and are also willing to stop the shipping companies, the very large shipping companies like Maersk, from transiting dual-use items to Israel. So this is a very important development, but it starts with the smaller companies, right? So when the country, when Elbit Systems are trying to get components for their bombs, for their weapons, they usually go to the smaller companies and try to secretly bring those components to Israel without. I've seen one of the contracts where they actually wrote into the contract that the shipping company is not allowed to put anything online about the contract for delivering materials for Elbit Systems. They are completely aware that this is illegal. which is of course easier to get countries like Spain, but also Portugal and Malta, who also played a role here, to say, well, this is a ship that is clearly doing something underhanded. The law is very clear on this issue. Once we get that stage, and we did reach that stage, the next stage is to go after the giant corporations like Maersk. So, and that's where you also start to see the cracks in the global north, in those genocide enabling countries. In the previous interview, you spoke about the UK. I think a seminal moment for the UK was when civil servants wrote this letter where they said, by processing weapon export permits, we are concerned that we are committing a crime. And this is just our job. We are just civil servants. We're not supposed to commit crimes as part of our job. So the government needs to give us assurances that we don't carry liability if we do these things. So again, you don't really see the ethical argument here. It's not so much the moral outcry. These weapons are killing innocent civilians, and this is a crime against humanity, and we don't want any part of it. It's more about, we don't want to get into trouble. Unfortunately, with those genocide enabling countries, this is the argument that works more.
Shir, finally, it seems like such a, it's a very specific form of activism that people are like, these global shipping companies, these global markets. How can one person, make a difference here? But as you and the BNC point out, that there are ways that people can get involved with this military embargo campaign. What are the steps that people can take? How do they plug in, whether they're here in the States or in Canada or across Europe? What are what notes do you have for people?
Sorry, there is no way for individuals to make a difference like this. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. But collectively, we can do a lot.
Mm-hmm.
When people organize, then the real question should be organize around what kind of social impact that you can have. If you are a member of a church or a mosque or a synagogue, then this is a place that can organize a campaign. I think for the religious organizations, that the moral argument is really the best way to go. But for lawsuits that play a very important role in Western countries, because we need to act on the legal level. In the Western countries, the lawsuits require public awareness, public support, and usually the teams of lawyers will tell the activists, we need you to give information in a certain way, maybe hold a vigil in front of the courthouse on a certain day. And the idea is to do it in a way that is coordinated with the team of lawyers. For others, it's not the legal process or the religious organizations, but rather the unions. If you are not necessarily a member of a union which is making weapons, I mean, those usually are the last to take action, unfortunately, or the unions who are transiting and transporting the weapons. But even if you're a member of another kind of union, but you have connections through other union networks, like a teachers union would also have connections to university unions, which can take action on stopping military cooperation with Israeli universities on weapon developments. And then you have the academic networks, academic social circles are also very effective because the university research, joint research on weapon development is usually something that accompanies those arms deals. Another very important part of it, because the weapon agreements are reciprocal, there's usually a deal that says Israel needs, explosives, bombs, components for drones and planes, but is willing to sell surveillance equipment, targeting equipment, and so on. These kinds of technologies threaten civil liberties, threaten human rights in the importing countries. So civil society organizations that care about privacy, about equality, about the client privilege of clients of lawyers who don't want, some private company eavesdropping on their conversation with their lawyers, or medical privacy. These organizations have a very strong reason to support blocking those import deals, and thereby also prevent the other side of this reciprocal agreement. So the point is, first of all, be part of a bigger group, join an existing organization. If there is no existing organization, found one. And the BNC is always very happy and ready to invite new groups to the networks that we're establishing. We have networks for different regions in the world, and for different kinds of campaigns where the organizations that are interested in military embargo can take action, and in a collective way. So we already had, for example, a global day of action against spyware, Israeli spyware, which is absolutely one of the ways that Israel is exporting the technology that is destroying, threatening civil liberties and privacy all over the world. Now, the same spyware technology is used in Gaza to generate targets, to kill people, by hacking the phones of people in Gaza. So this network that is joined by a lot of organizations that are not necessarily interested in Palestine are now also part of the Palestinian solidarity movement. So if you're watching this and you want to do something for the military embargo, then your first question should be, who am I? What part of social circles am I active? Unions, churches, academia, or anything else? Which organizations are active already? And if there isn't one, then start one.
And yeah, exactly. And if you're not active, get active, because there will be a way. And I just wanted to highlight this statement from the BNC, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions National Committee, the day after ceasefire: escalate pressure to cease the genocide and help us dismantle apartheid. And this page, if we scroll down, I don't know if we can scroll through it here, but if you go to bdsmovement.net, you'll find this. And it's, if you go down, it has lots of ideas of how to be active and how to join the boycott movement more broadly. And of course, that includes the military embargo, but it also includes academic and cultural boycott, consumer boycott. And recently, there have been big successes for the boycott movement more broadly. And Nora, I know this is something you cover a lot, but one that is relevant in the Middle East or in the Arab world is that Carrefour, the huge French multinational supermarket or hypermarket chain, is being driven out of country after country. They've already been driven out of Jordan. They've been driven out of Oman. And I think they will be driven out of other countries soon. And we reported on this at the time, where workers at the Carrefour stores in Jordan were saying the stores have been empty in over the last year. And now that Carrefour has pulled out and divested, and they're under a new brand which is not linked to Carrefour, the customers are coming back in. That's what we see anecdotally from people going to those stores and telling us. So, this is happening all over the world. Big companies like McDonald's and Coca-Cola and various
Starbucks, yeah.
Starbucks, even though Starbucks is not actually present in Israel, but you know, the CEO has political leanings towards Israel that is sort of, I suppose, the impetus for that. But you know, these are also big companies. I mean, Starbucks, McDonald's, Coca-Cola represent American empire and American might, and so this is a way for populations in the Arab world and other parts of the world, in Malaysia, Indonesia, where McDonald's has lost a huge amount of business, for them to make the United States and its corporate and capitalist class pay a price for supporting this genocide. So these are ways that people can and should get involved to escalate the pressure, to keep up the solidarity. And of course, the military embargo is so central to that as well, often overlooked, but crucially important. And so we're very grateful for the work you do on that, Shir.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's this report by the BNC is also highlighting the fact that the genocide doesn't immediately stop with a ceasefire.
Right.
People are still at risk, and still it's also about access to food and medicine and heating and all that. But we know that up to the implementation of the ceasefire, Israel is trying to kill as many people as they can. Once the ceasefire is implemented, we can expect, if we see what happened in the north in Lebanon, that Israel violated the ceasefire about 100 times within the first week. And even later, the Smotrich has already said the first stage of the agreement is acceptable. But after that, the intention is that Israel will violate the agreement and start the military embargo is what makes this sustainable and what will bring the genocide itself to an end. So we have to make sure that Israel doesn't have any weapons by which to kill people. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, simple and crucial. Shir Hever, you are always a delight to speak to. We're always so grateful for your expert analysis and for giving, such a broad but sharp overview analysis of, things that ordinary people can do to put a wrench into this system of genocide and apartheid. And so thanks. I know our viewers and listeners are always asking to have you back on, so we'll have you back on very soon. Thank you so much for all of your work. And again, people can go to bdsmovement.net. That's the website for the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions National Committee. And there are ways you can plug in, or as Shir says, found your own organization to join the global network of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Shir Hever, thank you so much, and we'll have you on very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shir.